Welcome back, everybody. It's hard to believe this is going to be my 100th video here on YouTube. I started this channel a year ago, and this is actually also my first anniversary this weekend with the channel as well. So this is a kind of special day, kind of special video for me to put together. For this video, I decided to do a video, the type of video I really enjoy doing the most, where I do a lot of research on players and I can present the history of that ball player on there. Those are the ones I truly enjoy making the most. Over the year, I realized the stuff that kind of does the best, viewing wise, or a lot of people like looking at the vintage sets, vintage cards in general. Card shows seem to be the things that do really well. I'm hoping at some of these little episodes where I kind of talk about a player's history and talk about the card itself do catch on at some point, because I think it's the part that I really enjoy most about the hobby, is just being able to learn about these ball players that were played back in the 30s, 40s, 50s, and 60s, and kind of tying them to each other in some ways, you know, kind of like who played with who and who coached who was in the front office later on when the certain players were signed and brought into organizations. So I kind of like being able to do the history of the game, and I think like most baseball fans of my age, and probably vintage collectors in general, really appreciate the history as much as they do the cards. So it's certainly a bit of nostalgia, but I think it's also like, you know, a bit of like a learning experience every time I be able to pick up a new card, which I think is something I really enjoy. I couldn't have done this without, obviously, the support of people out there, most of the people that are watching the channels, but certainly the people that I also hold near and dear to my heart, such as family and friends, my wife as well, that have been able to kind of, I guess, support me and tolerate my, you know, silliness with being able to put these videos together. I certainly have some people I need to kind of like thank more than others that were contributors at some point during this first year. One being my good friend Ravi, who's appeared on the channel a few times. He just had his birthday yesterday. So he and the channel have a very similar birthday, if you will. My nephew Ryan, who's helped make a few videos, including the one that posted just this past week that seems to be well received so far, and I appreciate all the support I got on there. And then of course Dre Diaz, who's another like content creator out there. He's been able to help give me a lot of pointers along the way. So we've come a long way since I did my first video about this card that I recently acquired at the time. I'm going to put it in the background here because I do have some things to show you before we kind of jump into the video I'm going to put together that I did some research for today. So I'm going to turn the camera around and do that. So thank you all. Okay, I decided to put Minnie in the background over here, kind of in tribute to the very first video that I did that was about him. So we got Minnie Minoso's Bowman rookie card up there, the 1952 Bowman. Did have one item that came in this week. Wanted to show that real quickly. It's another one of those Topps 2001 Topps Gold project. Got the Tim Hudson. And the thing that was really striking about this card to me, obviously Tim and Barry Zito and Mark Mulder were obviously, you know, quite the pitching staff in the early parts of the 2000s. Each won 20 games at some point during that period when they were with the Athletics. But Hudson probably had the biggest and best career of all three, even though he didn't maybe have the single season kind of standouts that the other ones did, but he had the longevity and pitched well into the later parts of his 30s and won over 200 games. So maybe he's like a fringe guy that could see the Hall of Fame at some point, especially if they redefine like what metrics are needed for starting pitchers in this age where they're being pulled out in the 5th and 6th innings of games. So be kind of curious to see what happens when he kind of down the road as he's eligible for the Hall of Fame. I think he's going to be on the ballot soon if he wasn't already on it this year. But the stuff that stood out to me about this card is like, man, the color match here is just really phenomenal. From the green background, which goes with the green hat and trim on the uniform for the numbers, to the gold, which kind of matches the yellow in the uniforms there. And then you obviously have the green grass there, which kind of goes with the uniform. I just thought it was a really cool looking parallel to the set. So I don't know, I picked that one up. I really enjoyed that one. Wanted to just show you I didn't have a chance to really show these cards off last weekend. So I wanted to be able to kind of show you them real quickly before I kind of pull up the next video here. So This is the George Kell I picked up at the card shop last weekend. Getting a bad glare on this one, so I apologize, but this is the Red Heart card. I learned a little bit about this. Actually didn't learn something I did not know, that the Red Heart cards specifically were things that you redeemed after you bought 3 cans of dog food and you put it in an envelope with a dime, I think at the time is what they cost. Then you'd send it in, you'd get one of 33 different players that were released in across 3 different series. The Mantle and Musial are the big ones. If you're trying to be able to put that set together, the Mantle card's very pretty, and so is the Stan Musial card. This is George Kell, obviously Hall of Famer. Tigers primarily, but he also played with the Athletics. You can see the Red Sox here and the Chicago White Sox. And was a broadcaster for years too. And here's the back of the card. They're not numbered, which I thought was interesting too. I learned about them. There's actually not a numbering for the set. So you kind of have to look at different databases to know exactly the players that are in the set and how many cards there are of them, which is 33 from what I found out by learning about this card. So really happy to have that one. And then I did mention that I got this card too, which was, I don't know if it was featured on Chasing Cardboard, but it was part of one of their pickups in one of their shows. It's a 1950 Bowman Roy Campanella, just a really sharp looking card from a really cool looking set. Definitely has a little off centering here, and the edges are a little bit, the corners should say, a little bit rounded in some places, but kind of justifies the grade of 3.5, but it presents really well. There's a little paper loss on his face too when I looked more closely at it, but not a big thing that deters me from it. But what I did is actually I put it into a new plastic holder, and then I actually had stickers at the store from Chasing Cardboard, so I put it on here on the sleeve, not the card itself, as kind of a memory of like, oh, this was part of that collection, and I went and got it at that particular stop, so I'll know that into the future. They had little stickers there that were little freebies that you could pick up at the store there in Las Vegas. So I actually got this one as well, which is pretty cool. I don't know what I'll do with that one, but it's pretty neat to be able to have that in there. All right, so the two I have to show you today, I actually need to grab something. Oh, I forgot to grab it out of my box. Back here, I want to get some stands. So I'm going to do another chapter of the Diamond Stars, Diamond Star Stories. This I think will be my 3rd installment of these. So these two are not going to be graded cards. These are ones I picked up ungraded at the last Chicago Sports Spectacular. And I actually was doing a little research on these cards, and I found out something new too. So some of the cards that were released in Series 1 were again reissued in 35 and 36. So you don't know what year your card came from unless you look at the back. And I found out they updated the stats on the card, so you can figure out what year this is from. So this is going to be like from 1933 is when they mention his stat line. So it's actually going to be a 1934 issue card of Jimmy Wilson. I'll kind of put him up over here in the corner. And then we're going to talk about Billy Werber today too. So make sure they're kind of on there. They're not getting too much glare. All right, so we're going to talk about starting with both these players, but they do have something in common, and not just that they played at the same time or that they ended up being in the set together. There's a little bit more synergy there, and I'll talk about it in a minute. So let's start with Jimmy Wilson here on my left. Jimmy Wilson played professionally from 1923 to 1940 as a baseball player. But what was interesting is his parents immigrated from Scotland, and he actually started playing professional soccer before he started playing professional baseball. So I learned a little bit about, soccer of that era in the 1920s, as there was like some level of professionalism going on at soccer at that time here in the United States, even though it wasn't nearly as organized as it is today. So he started as a professional soccer player, and he left school at 14 and went to start working in the text mills, and he kind of joined the soccer team and also the baseball team. He began to play professionally in 1919 as a soccer player, but then eventually began playing professionally as a baseball player in 1920 as a catcher. Eventually he gave up soccer in 1923 and later debuted with the Philadelphia Phillies later on there. So he played 2 stints with the Phillies. Here he is actually in a Phillies uniform of that era. He also played with the St. Louis Cardinals for a brief period of time and also the Cincinnati Reds at the very end of his career. And that's going to be important as we kind of go through it. So Jimmy was a two-time All-Star, 1933 and 1935. He actually was the starting catcher for the National League in the 1933 All-Star Game, which was the very first All-Star Game here at Comiskey Park in Chicago. He actually won 2 World Series, part of 2 World Series championship teams, once when he was in St. Louis in 1931, and then again at Cincinnati in 1940. Actually, in 1940, that's a pretty interesting story, actually, how he became like an active player during that time. He was a player manager for the Phillies from 34 to 38, and then was let go as a manager. Then he joined the coaching staff of Cincinnati in, I think, 1939 or 40. I can't remember which year. I think he joined in 39. And he actually was not on the active roster. He was just a coach at that time, but got pulled onto the active roster to be the third string catcher when, sadly, the backup catcher to Hall of Famer Ernie Lombardi actually died from suicide at that point during the season. So they brought Jimmy off the sidelines and onto the field. So he played a little bit during the rest of that season, but by the time the World Series ran around, Lombardi had hurt himself earlier in the season, but wasn't healthy enough to be able to be on the field during the 1940 World Series when they played, I believe, the New York Yankees. And so he got called into action over the backup at that point. I'm not sure exactly why, maybe because of his experience, but he batted .353 in the World Series at that year, and that was actually his last active year as a player, and he went back to coaching thereafter at that point. So I thought that was kind of an interesting story when I found that out. He came off the bench and kind of filled in and had some success. He also managed, as I mentioned, he was a player manager of the Phillies, but he actually went on and managed the Chicago Cubs after he officially retired as a player. His best finish was 5th with the Chicago Cubs in 1943. His winning record was 493 wins and 735 losses. So it wasn't something where he was like super successful as a manager. He retired from baseball in general right after he was let go, I believe in 1944. And actually, at the age of 46, he had just retired and was starting to get into the citrus business in Florida, and actually died unexpectedly at a heart attack at an early age. During his career as a ball player, he hit over 304 times, so he definitely was a pretty solid catcher during his period of time. So that's Jimmy. That's Jimmy Wilson. All right, there, as you can see in the catching position. As most of the cards in this set for catchers, they're going to be in the catching position in there, where you kind of see their equipment minus the mask and guards that they have, but they're kind of squatting in front of home plate, and they have that lovely Art Deco design and the colors that kind of go with it as the background for the card. And similar could be said for this next one. So how these guys actually are tied together is Billy Werber actually was also a member of the Cincinnati Reds in 1940, so they actually ran a team together that won the World Series. So Billy Werber actually is a player that lived to be almost 101. At the time of his death in 2009, he was the oldest former ball player to still be alive at that point. He was mostly an infielder, playing third base and shortstop. He played a little left field. Over the course from 1930 to 1942, he started off with the Yankees, didn't really make the grade there, couldn't break into that infield that had a few Hall of Famers in at that time. And was traded over to the Red Sox, later played with the Athletics, the Reds, and the Giants too. So he actually jumped over to the New York Giants shortly after the Reds in 1940. He was on the Reds during 39 as well when they lost to the New York Yankees, and then obviously in 40 when they beat the New York Yankees, and he hit 370 in the 1940 World Series. He led the American League in stolen bases 3 times during his career and hit 321 in 1934. He's a member of the Reds Hall of Fame as of like 1961. He had a career WAR 296.1. Some other highlights is I thought this was kind of interesting. At one point during his season, he led the league in at-bats with 716 plate appearances, which is a crazy amount. Another thing of note of this ball player is, actually there's a lot of things of note, but this one was interesting because there's only one person that could ever be this. He was the first player to actually bat on live television. So he was playing in the game that was that part of that first broadcast. So that's probably an answer to a trivia question at some point for everybody down the line, is who was the first player that bat live on a television broadcast of a baseball game, of a Major League Baseball game. He actually was a college graduate of Duke, and he was an All-American both in baseball and also in basketball too. One other thing that was kind of a note of his playing career too is that he is the only player still at this point to hit 4 consecutive doubles in both leagues. He did it both in the National League and the American League, which I thought was kind of interesting that no one has been able to duplicate that since. So that's an interesting little fact about him as a player. Probably another answer for a trivia question down the road. After his playing career, he actually got into hunting a lot. He was sold pensions and later joined his family's insurance business and took that over. And that's what he did until he retired. He wrote 3 books actually during his time after baseball, 2 about baseball and 1 about hunting. He actually was a very talkative individual. I think he was pretty engaging from everything I kind of read about him, and kind of stayed up with baseball up until maybe the last decade of his life, where he kind of lost an interest a little bit because I think he kind of cited that he wasn't grooving as much with the look of the modern baseball player, and I guess the name that kind of came to mind that kind of embodied like what he didn't like about how modern baseball players looked was Johnny Damon when he had his big bushy hair and beard when he played for the Boston Red Sox during that time, which I thought was kind of interesting. So there you go. Those are 2 1935 Diamond Star cards. Still going to be working on this set. Hopefully we'll get some more next month, possibly at the Chicago Sports Spectacular. I actually got my ticket this week and I know which day I'm going to go. So I'm going to be going on that Sunday. So if anybody's around that's going to be planning to attend, let me know. Maybe we can find each other during the show, which would be really cool to do that. So I'm also going to be getting Jim Cott's autograph on his 1960 Topps card, which I have in my collection already. So I hope you guys enjoyed this. I'll be back later this week at some point, and have a wonderful rest of your weekend. And thank you all so much for supporting the channel.